At length the day dawned about 5 o'clock. The various emotions of shame, grief, and terror with which all were agitated, might be traced in our countenances.
The words you just heard were those of a French Catholic convicted by the Portuguese Inquisition in Goa in India in 1676. You may never have heard about the Portuguese Inquisition or its tribunal in India, but 300 years ago it was more notorious than the Spanish Inquisition. In fact, in the early modern period, roughly 1500 till 1800, there were three permanent inquisitions in the Catholic world: the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the Roman Inquisitions. Although there were differences, the main principles for all three were the same, and all of them held lavish ceremonies to publish the sentences they had passed. These are known in English by its Portuguese name, auto da fé.
Is simply the moment in which inquisitorial sentences are executed.
Together, these inquisitions exposed and publicly punished tens of thousands of people over 3.5 centuries.
Any justice of that time used to execute and carry on his sentences publicly, and if possible with some solemnity. The Inquisition led the solemnity to its higher pitch, and progressively they made him more and more spectacular when they grew aware of the capacity of propaganda of the auto da fé.
In this video, we'll explore what it felt like to be punished as an auto da fé. Given that we are talking about tens of thousands of people, it is surprisingly hard to find a description of the events by anyone who was convicted and who was punished as an auto da fé. This is not because they were all killed. In fact, the first systematic statistics study undertaken of the Spanish Inquisition showed that the numbers of executions had been vastly exaggerated in previous writing.
Ja, den første overraskelse, det var jo så få, der var brændt.
While the majority were not killed, they were sworn to secrecy and prosecuted if they revealed anything pertaining to their trials. And yes, people were punished for this because, of course, they talked. People always talk, but they very rarely wrote. Charles Delon was an exception, and his book became an instant sensation in Europe. It went through many printings, was revised twice, and translated to numerous languages. In fact, it is still in print today in several languages, more than 300 years later. Even I have translated it and produced a Norwegian language version of it. I have linked to various modern editions of this book below, both versions you can read for free on Google Books and physical copies you can buy on Amazon. It is a book well worth reading, it is a good story, and is well told. If we have few direct testimonies from the convicts, we have numerous reports from both spectators and the proud inquisitors in the aftermath of successful autos. We know from preserved diaries that the autos da fé made a great impression on spectators, though not in every case what the inquisitors had in mind. For example, a 17th century Catalan diarist always went to Barcelona whenever an auto da fé was held. On his return home, he was always sitting down, recording his impressions, and ending his entry in the diary with the words, "May God preserve the Holy Inquisition." The exception was when he had witnessed the burning of some sodomites, in other words, men who had engaged in homosexual activities. Then he went home and wrote, "May God preserve us from temptation." So in other words, the inquisitors gave him ideas. The inquisitors always thought it was important to have many spectators. They advertised the autos days and sometimes weeks in advance to allow people living in the province time to travel to see the spectacle. And it filled them with pride when the crowds were big. The trials were secret, at least in principle, and the public reading of the sentence was their culmination.
It was a public penance.
Half the kingdom came to see, wrote the diarist in Valencia in 1621, meaning the kingdom of Valencia. It wasn't just the autos da fe they came to see, but also the procession through the city before the auto, and the physical punishment meted out by secular authorities after the auto. The procession before the auto da fe made a great impression on Charles Delon.
We were led through the principal streets, and everywhere regarded by an immense crowd. At length, overwhelmed with shame and confusion, and fatigued by the walk, we arrived at the Church of St. Francis, which had been previously fitted up for the celebration of the auto da fe.
Confusion, shame, fatigue, and the auto da fe hadn't even started yet. The most poignant emotions here are probably shame and fear. It is easy for us today to focus on the fear. Fear was part of the essence of the autos da fe, scaring the spectators to change their behavior. The Inquisitor Bartolomé de Fonseca wrote from Goa in 1574 that the latest auto da fe had been a solemn auto with great terror and fear. But fear wasn't the only objective. The autos da fe should also showcase the might, the justice, and the clemency of the Catholic Church. The auto was a play put on to show what Judgment Day would look like. And the high point was if one or several of the stubborn heretics sentenced to die recanted and confessed during the very auto da fe, and thus showed the crowd the power and the forgiveness of the Church, which then could take that person off the stage or even off the pyre and take him or her back into the fold of the Catholic Church. This was high drama, but it also gives us an indication that fear may not have been the predominant feeling for some of those sentenced to die. Some of them even chose to die for their faith, even when faced with such cruel and grisly a death as that of being burned alive. Some of them chose to become martyrs. For some, the feeling of relief must have been strong. Finally, the trial was over. They no longer had to pay for their own jail, while their belongings were sold off cheap at auctions and their family was reduced to poverty. They no longer had to fear that the inquisitors had gathered even more testimony against them. No more nasty surprises after hearing the sentence. The most prevalent feeling, however, must have been shame. Shame and dishonor. Now, just how important this was in early modern Europe is perhaps difficult to understand for us today. Having been shamed and dishonored completely changed your life prospects in those days. In the records of the Spanish Inquisition, I have found a number of letters from convicts seeking help from the inquisitors after their convictions. Yes, they actually sought help from the people who had judged them. Young women wrote and sought help to obtain dowries to secure marriages, since their prospects had been crushed after their appearance at an auto da fe. Men sought help to obtain employment so that they could feed their families. After having appeared at an auto da fe, nobody would employ them. And the inquisitors did sometimes help. They did help with employment, and they did help with dowries. In all cases, the conviction and punishment dishonored and shamed the convicts. The auto da fe ensured that everybody knew of their dishonor. As they walked the streets, as they later sat on benches before coming forward for the reading of their sentence, the shame of being exposed like this after having been confined to their cells for months and frequently even in solitary confinement, it must have been overpowering to suddenly appear in front of thousands of people. What did it feel like to watch an auto da fe, to be a spectator?
It is looking at a Hollywood film. So, have a look at Rizzi, you'll understand. Here is a king, here is the inquisitor. Golden cloths for every part. Music. We forgot the music. A solemn mass. Thousands of people. I suppose that some of them with lunch. And I suppose that the ambience was something like a stadium, and people enjoying being there, being together. And at the same time, they knew that this happiness, this was also a good work which benefited the soul. Perfect. A good sermon, and he who heard once a very good sermon by a professional knows that rhetoric can be very enjoyable.
To sum up, shame, fear, apprehension and relief must have been the most common and strongest feelings among the convicts at an outlaw affair. And those feelings were part of the punishment. Yet, before ending, I want to mention one small but important group. Every one of those acquitted was given the choice of appearing at an outlaw affair, to have their sentence read and their innocence announced to the assembled crowd. Not everyone at an auto was convicted, and the acquitted numbered in the thousands. Most of them did not appear at an outlaw affair, and those who had been acquitted and who did appear at an outlaw affair made a great impression. In the procession, they did not march with the convicts. Instead, they formed their own group or even marched with the officers of the Inquisition. They were dressed in white, with a laurel wreath in their hair. A sign of having defeated the accusations against them, they were victors. And they carried an olive branch in their hand to symbolize peace and forgiveness. At the auto itself, their acquittal was read aloud to the masses. And the feeling must have been of relief, joy, perhaps even revenge and power. The way their participation was framed was as the winner of a contest, where the Inquisition was the independent referee. The reality, of course, could hardly have been more different. I hope you liked this video and felt that you learned something. If you did, please hit like and subscribe so that I will know that somebody is actually watching these videos and that it is worth the time and effort for me to make more videos like this. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and be good.